Basquiat, A Quick Killing in Art by Phoebe Hoban. Introduction. Basquiat lives. He died in 1988 at age 27, becoming an instant myth. But more than a quarter of a century later, Jean-Michel Basquiat is a bona fide international cultural icon, an ever-expanding phenomenon. Basquiat's paintings now routinely sell for multi-millions at auction, within the same price range as some Picasso's. His work has appeared in half a dozen major retrospectives in the last 5 years, from Paris, France, to Brooklyn, New York, to Bilbao, Spain. He's a regular reference of such hip-hop masters as Jay-Z, who prominently features him in several songs. Most recently, his 2013 Picasso Baby, in which he shouts out he's the new Jean-Michel. The music video, directed by Mark Romanek, includes clips from an art star-studded 6-hour Pace Gallery performance. Kanye West has also rapped Ari Basquiat, and Swizz Beatz literally wears the artist on his arm, rather than his sleeve, in the form of a tattoo. Images of Basquiat's art appear on products from sneakers to skateboards. A short-lived restaurant in his old stomping ground, the East Village, even introduced a $64 Basquiat burger, made, of course, of the best Kobe beef. Blink, and you'll miss a brief but unmistakable flash of Basquiat's painting, Self-Portrait as a Heel, in the Oscar-winning film The Big Short. Much and little has changed in the New York City art world since the late 1990s, when I first chronicled Basquiat's hyper life and times. The artist, who, had he lived, would now be 55 years old, would scarcely recognize the gentrified neighborhoods where he originally scrawled his same-o poetry, or for that matter, Soho's main drag, West Broadway, which in the several decades since Basquiat's Soho salad days in the 1980s has been transformed into an urban mall. To a large extent, the city that Basquiat inhabited, with its storefront galleries and iconic clubs, CBGB, the Mud Club, area, etc., is a lost city, the unique downtown cultural milieu that launched his career, a relic of the past. But the art world bubble, an amazing extravaganza of speed and inevitably greed, has only accelerated. Since the early 2000s, with the exception of the 2008 recession, the art market has maintained an extraordinary pace, with auction results from a single sale at a major house like Christie's often reaching or surpassing the $500 million mark, and a voracious international appetite for mega collecting. Take the record-setting Christie's sale of Modigliani's New Couché for $170.4 million to the Chinese art collector Liu Yiqian in November 2015. Or for that matter, the most expensive painting ever sold at auction, Picasso's Les Femmes d'Alger, for $179.4 million, also at Christie's, just 6 months earlier in May. In early 2016, the art market showed signs of softening thanks to uncertainty in the global economy. Some of the major players in Basquiat's career have dropped out. Anina Nozay, one of the first dealers to recognize the artist's talent, for instance, no longer maintains a gallery. But others have stayed in the game. Mary Boone, who first showed Basquiat when she had a space on West Broadway, has long since relocated to Chelsea on Fifth Avenue near 57th Street. And then there is Larry Gagosian, an early promoter of Basquiat's work on both coasts, who, along with David Zwirner, is now widely considered one of the 2 most powerful art dealers in the world, with an astonishing 15 galleries globally, 5 alone located in New York City. The importance of Basquiat's work, both in terms of its financial worth and its historical relevance, has exponentially increased. Of the 80s generation of painters, Basquiat alone has consistently set records for his price at auction. When it comes to celebrity status and bankability, he has more or less left his peers, such artists as Keith Haring, David Saul, and Julian Schnabel, in the dust. In May 2013, the artist broke all former sales records for his work when his 1982 painting, Dust Heads, sold at Christie's post-war and contemporary evening auction for $48.8 million. His price had nearly doubled in just 6 months, since his previous record of $26.4 million at Christie's in November 2012. Says Koji Ayonu, specialist for Christie's post-war and contemporary art, Basquiat is getting his due recognition. He is getting the key to the kingdom from masters like de Kooning of the previous generation. When you start to think about the peer group, not just New York or the 80s, but great painters like Picasso, Richter, Prince, Basquiat has a seat at the table. He's got his crown on his head. He is not only a cultural icon, he really embodies New York at its peak. But it's not just the Basquiat market that has grown. So has the popular audience for his work. In February 2013, the Gagosian Gallery's 24th Street space mounted a Basquiat blockbuster exhibit that included 59 major works and had people lining up around the block for days. Louise Neri, a director at the gallery, said that the show attracted as many as 6,000 visitors a day, right up until the hour it closed 3 months later in April. Basquiat is a cult figure, says Neri. He was a superstar in his own time because he was unique, a very young artist who was beautiful, charismatic, cool, just a character and figure in every sense of the word. His legacy was partly kept alive by the tragedy of his death, but he was a man way ahead of his time. He was a bridge between cultures, art and music, art and poetry, identity and racial politics. He was such a polymath and omnivore. People really delight in trolling for all of those references and trying to decipher the cryptographic as well as the pictographic material, from the Greek wars to fast food. He was such a rich character, and with time and hindsight, his whole status just intensifies. In the past half-decade alone, Basquiat has had blockbuster shows in venues ranging from Paris, where a retrospective at the Musée d'Art Moderne had record crowds from October 2010 through January 2011, to Manhattan, where the Tony Aquavella Galleries had a major drawing show based on the extensive collection of Herb and Lenore Shaw, early Basquiat collectors, from April 30th through June 12th, 2014. Intimate nude black and white photographs of the artist himself, shot by an early girlfriend, Paige Powell, were on view at the Suzanne Geiss Company from January 16 through February 22, 2014. In New Orleans, the show Basquiat and the Bayou, which included a suite of 9 canvases, was a critical highlight of the Prospect 3 Festival and ran from October 25, 2014 through January 25, 2015. In February 2015, another Basquiat retrospective opened, this one in Toronto. The Now's the Time show of over 100 works organized by AGO, Art Gallery of Ontario, ran through May 10, 2015, before traveling to the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, where it drew record attendance from July 3rd to November 1st, 2015. Meanwhile, from April 3rd to August 23rd, 2015, the Brooklyn Museum paid tribute to Basquiat, the Scribe, with an elegantly curated show, Basquiat, the Unknown Notebooks, that included 160 pages taken from 8 notebooks loaned by early collector Larry Warsh. Interspersed with key paintings and drawings, it beautifully explicated Basquiat's inextricable use of language and image. And when MoMA PS1 opened its Greater New York show in October 2015, an entire room was devoted to Henry Flint's vintage photographs of Basquiat's Samo writings, done with his graffiti partner, Al Diaz. The Ride at Oregon's Portland Art Museum from November 4th, 2015 through April 3rd, 2016, was culled from Paige Powell's archives and featured a floor-to-ceiling video projection of 3 images of the artist in a limo watching television. The Unknown Notebooks show resurfaced at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Georgia on February 28, 2016, where it will run through May 29th before traveling to the Perez Museum in Miami, where it will open on August 11, 2016, almost exactly 28 years to the day of Basquiat's death, and run through October 23rd. Basquiat has thoroughly permeated the culture at large, from Uniqlo hoodies to iPhone covers, even a kitchen towel scrawled with the famous graffiti, Samo is dead. Dead is crossed out, Basquiat style, replaced by alive. On the more serious side, Basquiat's filmography, which already consisted of the 1996 film Basquiat by Julian Schnabel, starring Jeffrey Wright, and Downtown 81 by Ido Bertoglio, Glenn O'Brien and Marie Paul, which stars Basquiat himself, now includes Tamra Davis's feature Jean-Michel Basquiat, The Radiant Child, based on a 1986 video interview shot by Davis and Becky Johnston, several brief excerpts of which are quoted in this book. The film, released in January 2010, introduced the artist and his work to a whole new generation. As Fred Braithwaite, aka Fab Five Freddy, artist, hip-hop pioneer, and ardent friend of Basquiat's, puts it, forever in his 20s, it's easy for young folks now to connect with him, and most importantly, the works literally speak as they are filled with his words. For another perspective on Basquiat, Jennifer Clement's well-received book, Widow Basquiat, about Suzanne Malouk's passionate relationship with the artist, based in part on pages of personal memoirs Malouk gave to Clement, a friend, originally published in 2000, was reprinted in 2014. When Basquiat's father, Gerard, with whom he had a difficult relationship, died in July 2013, he left an estate valued at $45 million, less than the current record for a single painting, and some interesting questions. Gerard had refused gallery representation for his son's work for years, preferring to control it entirely himself. Although he was an accountant and paid $8.5 million in taxes in 2010 for the half of the estate that belonged to Basquiat's mother, Mathilde, who died in 2008, appraised by Sotheby's at $36 million, the IRS instigated an audit inquiry. Gerard left paintings to each of his two daughters, who were administrators of both the estates of Mathilde Basquiat and Jean-Michel Basquiat. Lisanne Basquiat inherited a portrait of Jean-Michel by his one-time mentor, Andy Warhol. A Warhol portrait of Gerard went to his daughter, Janine Erivo. Gerard left Basquiat's last known painting, Dry Cell, to his long-time partner, Nora Fitzpatrick. In September 2012, the authentication committee that had been established to put the seal of approval on the prolific artist's work disbanded, as it had announced it would in January that year, making it more difficult to prove the provenance of the lesser-known pieces. In November 2013, Janine and Lisanne followed up on a lawsuit filed by their father against the IRS in May 2013, just months before his death, for overvaluing Mathilde's half of the estate at $69 million. A year later, in November 2014, the U.S. tax court entered a decision that the estate owed the IRS $1.5 million. In addition to tax due, there was an outstanding balance of $79,500 from a total sum of $378,708, of which $299,208 was already assessed and paid, plus any interest that accrued. In March 2014, Alexis Adler, a girlfriend with whom Basquiat lived on East 12th Street from 1979 to 1980, launched what was meant to be a month-long show at Christie's of nearly 50 works that the artist had made during that time, ranging from a door with the words "Famous Negro Athletes" to an intact wall that had remained undisturbed in her apartment for over 30 years, to painted sweatshirts. Several major works were slated for Christie's first open sale on March 6, where the wall and the door instantly sold. Another 41 pieces were offered online. But the auction house abruptly stopped the sale when Basquiat's two sisters filed a $1 million lawsuit claiming that some of the works were fake, although 6 of the works had authentication committee certificates. The estate later withdrew the suit. Nobody doubts that Basquiat's reputation and market will continue to soar. Some of my colleagues think that in our lifetime we will certainly see a painting sell for $100 million, says Aino, who classifies Basquiat as a major artist in an emerging new category, contemporary classic. Something has turned over now, something has changed. He has international recognition, major retrospectives have taken place around the world. Basquiat is here to stay. Indeed, when I reconsidered Basquiat's place in the canon in the afterword I wrote in 2004, also included in this book as is an analysis of Basquiat's painting, I noted that his museum presence in terms of both his inclusion in permanent collections and major shows, as well as a consistent level of scholarship by curators and art historians, had considerably lagged behind his market value. That has significantly changed, at least in terms of major shows, as evidenced by the number of recent Basquiat retrospectives accompanied by hefty catalogues. However, Basquiat is still not in the permanent collections of America's major museums. In Basquiat's hometown, the Whitney has 3 Basquiat paintings, but while the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, and the Brooklyn Museum have some works on paper, none own canvases. a significant omission that should be corrected. Basquiat fulfilled that cynical aphorism, die young and leave a beautiful corpse. But Basquiat did something else. He left a beautiful corpus. With each passing year, the remarkable energy and perspicacity, the unmistakable originality of the artist's work increases in power. From the innate verve of his line and form to his idiosyncratic use of poetic/political text, Basquiat was a master of sampling, synthesizing everything from cartoons to hobo symbols to art history to jazz in his art, creating a unique personal iconography that was not just of its moment, but continues to vibrantly resonate. The fertile downtown New York City art scene into which the artist emerged, the evocative backdrop for this biography, may be long gone and much missed, but the work of Basquiat, aka Samo, lives. Phoebe Hoban, February 2016. Preface. Start with the head. He painted them obsessively. The hair was a focal point. Shaved like a convict's when he left his home in Brooklyn at the age of 15. He said it was a disguise so that the cops wouldn't find him. Shaped into a futuristic blonde mohawk when he hit the downtown scene, recognizable topiary in clubland. As Samo evolved, graffitiist extraordinaire, so did the hair. Now the skull was half exposed, the skinhead fringed with Rasta dreads. Then the dreadlocks, Basquiat's own version of a crown. He said he took the symbol from the King World Productions trademark at the end of The Little Rascals, but he made it his own. Next, the eyes. There was that look. He didn't copy it from Warhol, but he knew how to use it. People said his eyes could eat your face, see right through you, zap you like the X-ray vision of his comic book heroes. He saw things others didn't see. In order to connect, he disconnected. Into paranoia, into drugs, into music, into television, sampling the culture, splitting it back in scrambled bits. Then the skin. There was no escaping it. It contained him. He couldn't get cabs. People wouldn't shake his hand. It betrayed him, didn't keep out the world. It was too thin, too sensitive. He had no spleen, no way to filter out poison. In the end, it erupted, a surface image of his inner plague. The feet were often bare, a suit, no shoes. A self-conscious reference to African royalty, arrogant and folksy. He had this dance, bugged out, future primitive, a hip-hop spaceman from another planet. The walk was something else. Not like a homeboy in new high tops, a curious lope, half bum, half child. Basquiat kept no standard records. His life was cash and carry. But there are records, hundreds of them. Drawings, paintings, and notebooks that reveal him like a Rorschach test. Basquiat lived his paintings. He slept on them, walked on them, ate on them. He scribbled the phone numbers of his friends on them, outstanding debts, takeout menus, names of people and places, lists from reference books, his idea of history. He died of a heroin overdose at 27, like his heroes, brilliant jazz junkies and artists. According to one of his last notebooks, he planned to buy a saxophone. Chapter 1. Overdosing on art. If you had only 24 hours left to live, what would you do? I don't know, I'd go hang out with my mother and my girlfriend, I guess. Video interview, Tamra Davis and Becky Johnston, 1986. Friday, August 12, 1988. On the sidewalk outside 57 Great Jones Street, the usual sad lineup of crack addicts slept in the burning sun. Inside the 2-story brick building, Jean-Michel Basquiat was asleep in his huge bed, bathed in blue television light. The air conditioner was broken and the room felt like a microwave oven. The bathroom door was ajar, revealing a glimpse of a black and tan jacuzzi tub. On the ledge of the tub was a small pile of bloody syringes. There was a jagged hole punched in the bathroom window. Beneath it was scrawled the legend, "Broken Heart," with Basquiat's favorite punctuation, a copyright sign. Kelly Inman, Basquiat's 22-year-old girlfriend, was downstairs writing in the journal that Basquiat had given her. He usually slept all day, but when he still hadn't come down for breakfast by mid-afternoon, Inman got worried. When she looked into the bedroom to check up on him, the heat hit her full in the face like a wave. But Basquiat seemed to be sleeping peacefully, so she went back downstairs. She and the housekeeper heard what sounded like loud snores, but thought nothing of it. A few hours later, Basquiat's friend, Kevin Bray, called. He and Basquiat and another friend, Victor Littlejohn, were supposed to go to a Run DMC concert that evening, and he wanted to make plans with Jean-Michel. Kelly climbed back up the stairs to give Basquiat the message. This time, she found him stretched on the floor, his head cradled on his arm like a child's, a small pool of vomit forming near his chin. Inman panicked. She had never seen anyone die, although Basquiat's drug binges had made the scenario a constant fear. Now it seemed like the worst had happened. She ran to the phone and called Bray, Littlejohn, and Vrej Baghumian, Basquiat's last art dealer. When I got there, recalls Bray, Kelly said she had called an ambulance. She took me upstairs. Jean-Michel looked like he was comfortably out cold. He was on the floor, lying against the wall as if he had fallen down and didn't have the strength to get back up and was just taking a nap. There was a lot of clear liquid coming out of his mouth. We picked him up and turned him over. We shook him and we just kept trying to revive him. It took a long time for the ambulance to arrive. But for a while after the guys from the emergency medical service came, we thought he was going to be okay. They were giving him shocks and IV treatment. Victor had to hold Jean-Michel up like this so the IVs would drain, says Bray, stretching his arms out in a cruciform. Bray couldn't take it anymore. He went downstairs where Inman and two assistants from the Baghumian gallery, Vera Calloway and Helen Traversy, were trying to stay calm. We tried to take his pulse. His skin was so hot, says Calloway. Baghumian called the studio just as the pandemics arrived. He was in San Francisco and Helen was forced to act in his stead. It was almost like it was some sort of business transaction, says Bray. They put a tube in his throat and they brought him downstairs. They wouldn't tell us whether he was dead or alive and they took him outside. He had this beautiful bubbling red-white foam coming out of his mouth. We all hoped some miracle would happen, recalls Helen, who begins to cry at the memory. Outside on the pavement, a small crowd had gathered in horror and fascination. I was about to leave on vacation with my wife, says filmmaker Amos Poe, who was a friend of the artist. We watched as they loaded his body into the ambulance. I saw his father pull up in a Saab. I kept saying to my wife, Jean-Michel is dead. He really lived out that whole Destructo legend. Die young, leave a beautiful corpse. At Cabrini Medical Center, Basquiat was pronounced dead on arrival. The cause, according to the medical examiner's death certificate, would be determined pending chemical examination. A later autopsy report stated that Basquiat had died from acute mixed drug intoxication, opiates, cocaine in brackets. In the months before his death, Basquiat claimed he was doing up to 100 bags of heroin a day. Basquiat was buried at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn 5 days later. His father invited only a few of the artist's friends to the closed casket funeral at Frank Campbell's. They were outnumbered by the phalanx of art dealers. The heat wave had broken and it rained on the group gathered at the cemetery to bid Jean-Michel goodbye. The eulogy was delivered by Citibank art consultant Jeffrey Deitch, lending the moment an unintentionally ironic tone. Blanca Martinez, Basquiat's housekeeper, was struck by the alienated attitude of the mourners. They were all standing separately as if it were an obligation, she says. They didn't seem to care. Some looked ashamed. People began to leave the cemetery before the body was buried, ignoring the objections of the gravediggers. Martinez tearfully threw a handful of dirt onto the coffin as they lowered it into the grave. Basquiat's mother, Mathilde, looking dazed, approached Baghumian to thank him for his help to her son during his last days. Gerard Basquiat later admonished his former wife not to talk to the art dealer. The scene was already being set for a bitter battle over the estate of the artist. The following week, appraisers from Christie's set to work taking inventory of the contents of the Great Jones Street loft. Finished and unfinished paintings, other artists' works, including several dozen Warhols and a piece by William Burroughs, a vintage collection of Mission furniture, a closet full of Armani and Comme des Garçons suits, a library of over 1,000 videotapes, hundreds of audio cassettes, art books, a carton of the Charlie Parker biography, Bird Lives, several bicycles, a number of antique toys, an Everlast punching bag, 6 music synthesizers, some African instruments, an erector set, and a pair of handcuffs. There were also a number of paintings in warehouses. Following Andy Warhol's advice, Basquiat had tried to squirrel some of his work away from his ever-eager art dealers. According to Christie's, Basquiat had left 917 drawings, 25 sketchbooks, 85 prints, and 171 paintings. Artist Dan Asher walked by his old friend's loft and was astonished to see a number of Basquiat's favorite things in a dumpster: his shoes, his jazz collection, a peculiar lamp made out of driftwood, Sam Peckinpah's director's chair. Asher salvaged a few items. He sold the chair to a collector. It would be another year before Gerard Basquiat ordered a tombstone for his son, but for several weeks after the artist's death, he was commemorated by a small shrine some anonymous fan had placed by his door. Shrouded in lace, it held flowers, votive candles, a picture of Basquiat, some carefully copied prayers, and a Xerox of a David Levine caricature of the artist, complete with a caption: "In an age of limitless options and limiting fears, he still makes poems and paintings to evoke his world." A formal memorial service was finally held at St. Peter's Church in City Core Centre on a stormy Saturday in November. Despite the rain, wind, and bleak grey sky, several hundred people crowded into the church. Behind the pulpit hung a portrait of the artist as a young man, superimposed on one of his faux primitive paintings. One by one, his former friends and lovers remembered Basquiat. Grey, the band with which Jean-Michel had played at the Mud Club, performed several songs. John Lurie played a saxophone solo. Ingrid Sishi, editor of Interview magazine, read a eulogy. Ex-girlfriends Jennifer Good and Suzanne Malouk tearfully read poems. And Keith Haring, AIDS thin, reminisced about his friend. He disrupted the politics of the art world and insisted that if he had to play their games, he would make the rules. His images entered the dreams and museums of the exploiters, and the world can never be the same. Fab Five Freddy, who knew Basquiat from his old graffiti days, interpolated a poem by Langston Hughes. "This is a song for the genius child. Sing it softly, for the song is wild. Sing it softly as ever you can, lest the sun get out of hand. Nobody loves a genius child. Can you love an eagle, tame or wild? Wild or tame, can you love a monster of frightening name? Nobody loves a genius child. Free him and let his soul run wild." After the service, everyone went to MK, the bank-turned nightclub on Lower Fifth Avenue. Owned by Jennifer Good's brother, it was one of Jean-Michel's favorite places. In fact, it was his last destination the night before he died. He had come to the club looking for Jennifer. Now, people stood around the big television set, sipping champagne and watching a flickering black and white video of Basquiat. A photographer from Fame magazine snapped pictures of the known and not so known. The jewelry designer Tina Chow and her sister Adele Lutz, David Byrne's wife. Filmmaker Jim Jarmusch. It was the perfect send-off for the 80s art star. Part opening, part wake.